Our next speaker is not a stranger. You guys have heard him speak yesterday. The interim CEO and board member of Btrust. He wears many hats, by the way. This man is so intelligent, so smart. Sometimes it is intimidating. I mean, you hear him speak, he speaks really fast as well. And we are still trying to dissect what he said here, but he's already there. And so I would like to beg my father this morning that, Uncle, please take it easy on us as you are talking. Ladies and gentlemen, to talk to us, to give us the keynote speech on Btrust, please help me welcome to the stage Abubakar Nur Khalil. A bigger round of applause, please.
Just want to make sure that it works as well. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for making the third edition of ABC. Before I get started on my talk, I really want to take the time to appreciate Farida and the team and everyone who has been part of this historic journey. What started out as really a general mission that we had to explain to the rest of the world that Africa is not going to be a bystander in this movement, but Africa is essentially going to be a leader. And a handful of us, and honestly, a growing handful of us, I should say, have taken the time, the resources, the sacrifices over the last couple of years to not only make that a reality, but make that an inspiring story for the rest of the world to follow along. So what I want to do today and this morning is to kind of give you guys exactly what Btrust has been doing in terms of helping to catalyze this type of reality, as well as the future. To begin with, I obviously like to introduce myself. My name is Abubakar Nur Khalil, as she mentioned. I'm the CEO of Recursive Capital, which is a Bitcoin VC that essentially invests in early stage companies with a specific focus in Africa. I'm also the interim CEO as well as board member of Btrust, where our mission is essentially to decentralize Bitcoin development in what used to be called the Global South, but the global majority is a picking up term, which I think honestly should be the standard. I also write for Forbes, catalyzing the evolution of Bitcoin. Thank you. Thank you. I also write for Forbes, catalyzing the evolution of the Bitcoin industry, specifically in Africa, trying to make sure that we have key metrics when it comes to data, empirical analysis on exactly what's going on for everyone around the world to understand and kind of use this African experience as the template. I also work on Bitcoin Core, mostly PR reviews. So I think it's very important for us to take a step back and give you guys exactly what Btrust's vision is more broadly. First, I'd like to clarify that Btrust is not set up to dictate to Africa exactly what needs to be done to be built. For that to happen, what we need is Africans to stand up and to also do exactly what's necessary for the African continent. That is why our mission is not to dictate, but to enable and support. And what we understood over time is that the primary way in which we can do that is to make sure that we give the right tools, services, support for everyone on the continent to be able to meaningfully contribute to this mission. And in terms of our approach, we kind of took a step back again, honestly, to take a look at exactly what are the pain points in the continent, what are some of the issues that are being faced, how can we position Btrust, as well as the activities that we have in a strategic way that would help enable and not impede, that would help catalyze and not diminish, that would help empower and not confuse. So the method in which we took is to essentially focus on Africa as the initial template for everyone else to follow. And by doing so, the aim is to make sure that we have a strong base of what it means to build on Bitcoin, what it means for Bitcoin to make a meaningful difference, and most importantly, what it means for a people to, for the first time in human history, redefine all the issues that have been propagated across the continent in terms of things that have been done to the continent, in terms of the global standing, really, of the continent when it comes to dictating exactly what the future is. And in trying to do that, the most effective way we found is to make sure that we're decentralizing Bitcoin development primarily in Africa. And what we found out over the last couple of years of operating is that Africa has, if not the most talented base of developers, the talented base of developers. All our developers so far that have gone out through our grants programs or our alumni have gone on to the world to show that Africa is not here, again, like I said, to be a bystander, but honestly to lead the movement. They've done so in meaningfully contributing to projects like Bitcoin Core, which sit at the base level of infrastructure, all the way up to engaging in terms of blogs, writing out resources, and honestly setting themselves apart from everyone else in terms of really understanding and grokking exactly what Bitcoin means for the world and humanity and our place in human history. And I think the most important aspect to highlight in terms of this journey so far has been Btrust Builders. Btrust Builders honestly started out as a general concept of how can we most effectively provide all the infrastructure that it will require for individuals to go from not exactly knowing how to meaningfully contribute as developers to becoming some of the most leading folks in terms of voices as well as contributors. And what we found is a variety of, I guess, approaches. And the primary one that works is honestly focusing on three aspects. The community of developers that we're building, which is continuously growing, and over the last 3 years has gone from essentially 10 folks all the way up to over close to 500 people around Africa. And in terms of the other aspects, and in terms of the other aspects we've also seen is, we've seen that it's very important for developers to have all the necessary infrastructure to onboard them into becoming actual Bitcoin developers. And for a lot of us that got into the space through, honestly, what was really just a rugged approach of just challenging ourselves, has become a really standardized platform for a lot of people to go from really just understanding surface level exactly what Bitcoin is to positioning themselves as honestly leaders in this movement. And the last one is obviously supporting these developers, which brings me to grants. I think the most important thing to consider is we're building the best type of money. Like, that is what we're really doing with Bitcoin. And it makes no sense for developers to give up all this time, sacrifice their energy, without necessarily having some sort of meaningful sustenance for them to engage in this. And that's why we decided to make sure that for them to have a sustainable career, not only are we providing all the tools and resources for them to become developers, but also providing a very suitable and essentially a sustainable means for them to continue this work, which is why even not looking at how we essentially distribute grants, we've made sure that our approach is essentially to provide two aspects. So one is very, very difficult, I've seen with all the conversations yesterday, that for any developer to get into open source, mostly because of the difference in terms of a focus not away from goals that are geared towards a company or profit making, but are geared towards collaboration, community, as well as building together and inclusively. So I think a lot of the things that we had to realize is we have to bucket it out. So we have to essentially meet people where they are. We have to make sure that individuals have an opportunity to have some sort of self-discovery, which a lot of us need, honestly, to make sure that we understand where we fit overall, and to make sure that they're supported during this journey, which is why we have the Btrust Starter Grants. What it aims to do is provide these developers really the opportunity and the space for them to navigate the open source ecosystem unencumbered by any sort of dictatorial processes or any sort of, I guess, external influence, and to make sure that they find their footing. And once they do so, they eventually graduate up to the other grants that we provide, which is long-term support. Essentially, starter grants are 6 months, roughly, depending on what the trajectory is of the individual developer on a case-by-case basis. And when they get to the stage where they're now a lot more comfortable, they understand exactly what the process is, all the way up to getting into more long-term support, then they apply for what we call the Btrust open source cohort, where essentially they have mentors that are paired, as well as a growing community of other developers that are leading not only Bitcoin Core, but other important projects. And with that, I really like to say, we've learned a lot. I can tell you firsthand, and definitely the other folks that are doing this type of work and the board members can also testify to this, building on Bitcoin, using Bitcoin, having a paradigm shift, because honestly, this is not something that has ever been around in human history, is not easy. And that is why moving into 2025, we're extremely careful and extremely focused, I'd say hyper-focused really, on making sure that we have efficient structures that would help ensure that this ecosystem really continues to honestly outlive everyone in this room, and to make sure that our kids' kids have the opportunity to benefit from a technology that has continued to liberate a lot of people around the world, continue to restore financial freedom, agency, as well as ensuring that individuals around the world not only benefit from the current use cases that we see, as well as the value proposition of Bitcoin, but to also discover novel ways in which people currently are not even looking at how to use Bitcoin, whether it's electrification or even beyond that, or some of the antecedent or consequential things that really can come out of humanity. So the approach really for us is to split out a couple of things that we're already doing and to double down. So in terms of how we're onboarding developers, we've realized that there are a lot of benefits to having certain strategic bases around the continent to ensure that we're spurring and catalyzing really the movement. That is involved with bit devs, which we're going to continue to double down in terms of ensuring that developers have a home base in a lot of these cities in Africa to make sure that there's some sort of meeting point for them to coordinate as well as synthesize in terms of how they want to place themselves in the future. Another thing that we're looking at doing is the way to approach grants has continued to evolve. And I'm very proud that Btrust has been at the forefront when it comes to that type of evolution in collaboration with other organizations, whether it's OpenSats or some of the others that are giving out grants. And we're also rolling out the same approach by providing subcommittees. And the idea with that is to make sure that we're not providing any sort of arbitrary means of determining who gets to get a grant or not. We're removing effectively our egos, ourselves, our prejudices from this whole process, and ensuring that those that are already engaging in this industry productively on the open source side help us navigate really some of these applications to understand and give more context and clarity for the board to make a decision. Other than that, we're also looking at strategically focusing on ensuring that our grants are a lot more varied, because we've noticed that if we say Africa is building the future, there'll likely be a situation where we'll need tools, services, and the likes that are built for Africa by Africans. And what that means is the way in which people understand grants of essentially taking folks to the most popular projects possible has to shift into looking at how can we actually spur projects from the continent, and how can we make that sustainable in terms of getting projects that become just as equally important as other projects like BDK or some of the others, which is why we're looking at also expanding our grant services as well in 2025. Other than that, I'd say, just in closing with regards to 2025, before I get to some other points, is Btrust has really learned a lot about exactly how effectively to position ourselves to make sure that we're not, again, in the way of progress, but helping progress. So I want to take a bit of a personal look here, honestly, and I'd like to connect to the developers out there, specifically folks around, the young population really that we have on the continent. And what I like to say is, it's hard. Africa has a lot of problems, and it's one of those things where it's really difficult for whether it's young people or people that have been around on the continent not to have a general sense of apathy or some sort of lack of encouragement really to make a difference given the gravity or the enormity of the issues that we have on the ground. But what I like to say is Bitcoin is really not one of those things where you could look at and say it's going to solve all our problems. The way to look at Bitcoin is for you to get a holistic solution to a lot of problems, you need to make sure that you have some sort of a base or a foundation. So I like for you all to think of Bitcoin essentially as just a foundational layer that we can build upon to ensure that we have a prosperous, hopeful, and abundant future for Africa. And in terms of my plea, honestly, to developers is there are a lot of distractions. And one thing to keep in mind is the same way we talk about achievements from great scientists over the last couple of centuries or millennia, an important thing to look at is the combination of focus, determination, and making sure that you're focusing on things that will last, or honestly even outlast you, is the only way that you could really make meaningful difference and change in the world. And with Bitcoin, we have that opportunity where, for the first time in human history, we have this little small crack in time where we can redefine what it means exactly to be a useful person in the world, what it means to change Africa as a whole, which a lot of people have looked on as honestly an impossible task. But I firmly believe that with a critical mass of conscientious developers, as well as those that reflect the resiliency of Bitcoin, we're able to get there. And what I like to say is the future is not written in stone. The future is a reality that we get to create. And I like to also note that it's important to understand the biggest impediment to change is inaction. And the biggest accelerator to change is action. So we want to make sure we have a very multivariated base of developers that are ensuring that they understand this focus, and they're really geared towards ensuring that they're helping with this. So what I would say, honestly, is we really don't want to make a scenario where we're dictating who gets to come into the door, but allowing for the door and honestly the journey to determine those who would get to define exactly how Africa positions itself. And I think, in closing, all I'd say is next year what we're piloting is the Btrust Boss program. And the idea with that is to give developers their own opportunity to define where exactly they end up in the Bitcoin ecosystem, but have all the necessary support for them to get all the way up to the end. And in closing, what I'd like to say is, honestly, Africa, I firmly believe, will continue to make Bitcoin work. And that is the only reason why Bitcoin would eventually work everywhere else in the world. And I'd say this is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over the next couple of years and decades. But the most important thing for us, honestly, to think about in terms of moving forward is to make sure that we have a solid base to operate from. Because without that solid foundation, everything else that we're doing is essentially just a wrinkle in time. So what I'd like to say is, please and please, there are a lot of distractions around the world. There's a lot of folks trying to pull us apart. There are a lot of folks that are trying to redefine exactly what the priorities should be. But it's very obvious, even if you're trying to change, you need to understand exactly where you're coming from and how to operate strategically. So what I'd say in closing, honestly, is that in Africa, our biggest asset is not only our talent, but it's also our adversity. And the reason why I say that is that people with a problem are honestly the best fit to have that same capacity and potential to become a people with the solution. And I firmly believe Africa has the solution for not only ourselves, but the rest of the world. Come join us, make this a reality. Asante.